On this week's GTA 6 o'clock, the 4 versions of GTA 6.
Detective plot worthy of a thriller centered around 3 protagonists.
More music rumours.
And they were saying, like, Drake got his own radio station on Grand Theft Auto.
And the map identified.
Zoom into it enough, you could conceivably say, look, it's the outline of the GTA 6 map.
It's all here on this week's GTA 6 o'clock. Hello and welcome to episode 77 of GTA 6 o'clock, the world's most in-depth and best connected GTA 6 show. Yes, I am back. I have returned. I'm home. And here we are back in Los Santos. No, and here we are back in Los Santos. It looks a lot like where I was last week, in fact, Dan, although this office we are in the video is a bit nicer, to be honest. So let's get right into this episode. I am James JJ Jarvis, and here to talk to me about this week's topics is Dan DD Dawkins. Hello, Dan.
Hello.
Hello. How was last week?
Weird. It's the first time I think I've done the show solo. I did an interview episode.
Yes.
Yeah, it was strange, and I'm sure we'll talk about this. It was I think the first time in the history of GTA 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock that I've ever done the intro.
Well, quite, yeah. And, you know, all of you guys listening enjoyed the intro. So, 76 episodes of me doing it. Throw it out the window. We're going to alternate from now on. Dan's going to do next week's intro, and then you can pick which episode you like best.
Allow me to say, I said this to James off air, I did a version of the growly intro, as we've said on the show, is a legacy of the way the show used to be intro.
Well, I didn't do it this week.
Even 10 years ago.
Held
right?
back.
Now, some people love it, some maybe don't love it. I did a growly one, and I listened to it back, and I honestly sounded like I was doing a pirate impression. It just missed a yarg at the end.
I'm going to find it.
On this week's GTA 6 o'clock. It's all here on this week's GTA 6 o'clock.
Producer Nathan cleverly didn't use that version. So I think if we'd used that version, the comments would have been quite different. But thank you, everyone, for the kind comments on the show. It was very unusual doing it as almost like a monologue or a conversation with yourself as opposed to a lovely organic conversation with James. But yeah, I'm glad the pirate ship stayed afloat.
Well, at least you had quite a lot to talk about in terms
Yes.
of the alleged leaks that came out, and all of that you covered last week, so we're not going to go over it this week, but quite a lot of interesting stuff in there. And if you, dear listeners, thought that we'd be hunting around for information in these weeks between trailer 2 and the next significant content drop, which, let's be honest, is probably going to be next year now, worry not, because following on from your leaks last week, Dan, it would appear that the Titanic has truly hit the iceberg. That's a nice reference that I wrote that probably not everyone will understand. Although everyone understands that the Titanic hit an iceberg, right? I'm just thinking about the film and if anyone's seen it, but
I don't think it's a spoiler at this stage to reveal.
No. So yes, there is a new report that's coming from Fervalis, who's posted on Medium. Now, who is this person, you may say, and you may have said that out loud off air when you saw these notes, Dan. They write about GTA 6 and Rockstar. They were formerly the rockstarmag.fr chief editor, which is a website. They've previously revealed exclusive details about the new version of the Rage engine, which is Rockstar's proprietary engine that they use for GTA and Red Dead. And in October 2023, they said that the graphics gap between Red Dead Redemption 2 and GTA 6 will be greater than the one that we experienced between GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2, which is quite the thing. But then I guess if you think about the original GTA 5 release was on PS3,
yes,
the gap from that to Red Dead,
and that was what, PS4 Pro era?
Yeah.
It's a generation and a half.
Which is basically where we are now, right?
Yeah.
Red Dead 2 to GTA 6 is PS4 to PS5.
PS5 Pro if you're being generous by the time it launches.
I'm not being generous.
No, okay. But still a generation.
Yes.
But I agree. It could end up feeling like a generation and a half plus, whatever that means. Because as we were describing that, I was trying to mentally do that comparison side by side. Yeah, it'll be a noticeable leap, I think.
And as we've talked about from other games that we're seeing, maybe the leap from PS4 to PS5 at the beginning of the PS5 generation didn't feel that significant. But now, finally, we might be starting to see some games that are solely developed for PS5 and Xbox next gen. In terms of the Witcher stuff that we're seeing and things that say they're running on a base PS5, even though they might not be. But at least we're seeing that graphical leap between what you would have seen at the end of the PS4 generation to now what is... I don't know where we are in the PS5 generation. We're mid to late, right? We talked about this a few weeks ago, just between us, that it's 5 years old now. Is that right?
That is right. Though I had to mentally stop and actually use Google to check that. There were rumors going around this week. I mean, there's rumors all the time, but rumors this week about PS6 aiming for 2027. Which would then put us at 7 years between. That actually is quite a short console window.
Historically short.
Yeah, compared to what's been, but they've already launched Pro. Maybe, right? Who can tell? I think that's give or take a year. But yeah, I would say we're at the final third of the PS5 life cycle. I think the wider point I was going to make actually is, what would this generation have looked like had Xbox not launched an Xbox Series S, which I guess acted like the ground floor anchor for every multi-format production. It's noticeably not a stronger console, right? And it's something like the Witcher 4 tech demo you talked about didn't, I know it will run on an Xbox Series S, but even CDPR said it's not going to run at 60 frames on Xbox Series S.
It's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. They politely said it that. And there were lots of devs who went sort of more off the record and went, it's more than a challenge. Now, GTA 6 will be on S. So that's going to make for some really interesting comparisons when it comes out between the biggest disparity will be a PS5 Pro version, whether it's literally optimized for PS5 Pro or just is better on Pro. Yeah. Versus the base S. That's going to be, at the point of launch, that will be the biggest disparity between the versions. That's going to be really interesting. Quite how big a leap that makes, and then how the S version looks to GTA 5, versus Red Dead. There's lots of different... We'll make those videos. I'm sure everyone will. That'll be really interesting.
So let me bring you back to Rockstar Mag. It is a fan-made site, but they are pretty reputable. They don't tend to report on anything that they don't believe is legitimate. So the article about the Rage 9 information, which is the stuff we've just discussed, is from their sources. However, like last week, this doesn't necessarily mean anything. So as we get into this bit of information, make of it what you will. So this article was posted to Medium, written in French, translated into English. It's a long one. So there's a link in the description if you want to go and read the whole thing. But it highlights some certain things to do with the development of GTA 6, and more importantly, I guess, the storyline and how it may or may not have changed throughout development. So it's gone through, according to this post, quite a few different reversions. So the original decision to return to Vice City and its surrounding areas has been on the cards for years. That, I think, is a given. Fine. And now we're getting into, the rumors and the speculation. So the original concept was said to be from the project's synopsis. The team of writers led by Dan Houser had imagined a detective plot worthy of a thriller centered around 3 protagonists. Protagonist 1, an old Vice City police officer who is reputed to be incorruptible, but who ends up gradually falling into organized crime to protect his son, who has fallen into the dangers of drug use. Protagonist 2, the police officer's son, a very religious Cuban-American junkie who tries to escape his addiction and the dangers posed by the drug trafficking world. And protagonist 3, the right-hand man of a Colombian drug lord who manages the importation of narcotics into the United States via Vice City. His ambition is to found his own empire in North America. This original version was reportedly in development until the end of 2016, before Take-Two Interactive came along and said no, because it was too dark and not meeting their expectations. Now, my original question here for you, Dan, is rewriting, reversioning, and all of that kind of stuff happens all the time in game development. I don't think this is that unusual. Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, some of the core ideas do manage to be kept and tweaked throughout the reversioning and the rewriting process. Do we think there is anything in here that could have survived knowing what we know now about the plot and the characters that are in GTA 6 so far?
So do you mean, is there going to be any trace of this original version in the version we play?
Or we don't know that for a fact, but do we suspect there could be any of things that have seeped through from this original version into what we might see when the game releases in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, this is it's such a hypothetical. I would say that the DNA of this treatment of a GTA 6 is in... What's interesting is they followed the GTA 5 three-way mechanic, three perspectives. And it's essentially about... You got on one hand, I guess, the law, the good, the virtuous, the question of what would it take for them to turn on their own ethics and morality. Well, one of that would be, it's your own son, and it's so dear to you that it causes you to throw away all that's close to you. And then you've got the other side of the coin. So you've got the law and the baddie, the drug lord. So you get to see from both perspectives. And then I guess a third character, the son, who's between both worlds, I guess, trapped between both worlds. And then you get to see two perspectives plus one that's maybe straddling the lines, or someone who's intersecting with both worlds. That's a really interesting setup. It's really complicated. I wonder if the simplicity, quote marks, of the Jason Lucia mechanic is still both sides of something.
Yeah.
Trust, as we keep coming back to. It's like there's trust between them, but clearly the reason there's some sort of trust question between them is because is there explicitly or implicitly some reason for them to defect or not agree with each other? And it might go to the idea we've talked about a few times of, is Jason who he seems? Does he work for the other side of the law? That might work both ways. It might be actually Lucia is someone on the other side of the law. We don't know any of that yet. But I think that what's implicit in all of it is, are they all who they seem? And is the trust mechanic between them as clear as it appears? That the DNA of that feels true. And then what that would allow you to tell is a story of almost like, one story, two perspectives, or good or bad, or, like we said on the show before, the biggest thing in the world for a decade almost has been this horrible binary division between I believe in this, you believe in that, our worldviews can never meet, clash, you're an idiot, no, you're an idiot. That feels like the horrific story of the world. And I think it would make sense for a piece of art to explore both viewpoints. And I guess what you're really trying to do is go, we're both being idiots here. Everyone's got a legitimate claim. Can't we just get along? Yeah. That's my rush to the end version of it. But maybe that was the intent, and maybe that's the DNA thread that could survive. I guess there's a further question of do we believe this is true? Does this sound interesting? And these might be questions you're going to ask as we go further along, but there's probably a lot to say around all of that stuff as well.
Yeah, there's quite a lot to dig into here, and as we go through the different versions as well, there's quite a lot of references to people's family, which if we think back to the speculation that was years ago about the storyline of GTA 6 involving a child in some way at some point, this does hint towards that at some point they might have been related and you might have been playing, father and son in this sense, but maybe that gets tweaked along the way. Who knows? So there's some things in here that feel like, as we talked about before, feel like they could be true, but also, if you were really ingrained in everything that was being talked about to do with GTA 6, you could probably write this based on facts and speculation and rumors that have been out there and make it seem believable. So it just depends on how much trust you want to put in this source, really, I think.
Yeah, and that's the bit where I don't know. I'm not familiar like with this writer's work or with is it GTA's, what do we say?
The Rockstar Mag.
Rockstar Mag
FR.
FR. Probably because I assume it's written in French.
Correct.
Right? So, that doesn't make it any less credible. It just means that as a lazy native English speaker, I'm not reading the French version. Or I guess it wasn't sufficiently circulated or translated to have appeared in the eyeline. Doesn't make it any less credible. And I think, generally speaking, someone who cares enough to write literally a Rockstar Mag dedicated website probably cares sufficiently about their own reputation not to want to put stuff out there that's just completely false. It doesn't mean it's not false, because I've said things that are not true, believing them to be true, but you're always making a calculated risk on your sources, your judgment, all that stuff, right? So it's very hard to say, is this true or not, but I don't believe it's written maliciously, as in I'm going to make up a load of lies. I don't know that, but I would say it's for anyone who does that, you've got one shot at telling a load of lies. And I think from that point on, your reputation is dust.
Yeah. And the stuff that they've said previously, as we said, is held up as credible information. So they've, got a background in having some kind of connections with people who either are still or have been in a Rockstar at some point. So that, they've got some contacts. There was a couple of things in that first description, particularly to do with the protagonists, that I wondered if this worked out for you. Protagonist 2, a police officer's son, a very religious Cuban-American junkie who tries to escape his addiction and the dangers posed by the drug trafficking world. Do you see any similarities with Booby Ike, who we've got the description of from GTA 6, is a local Vice City legend and acts like it, one of the few to transform his time in the streets into a legitimate empire spanning real estate, a strip club, and a recording studio. Booby's all smiles until it's time to talk business. There's some, for me, hints there of, someone who's trying to escape their addiction and then being the local legend, transforming their time on the streets to an empire. Like, there's some fragments there that I could see them going, all right, if this character's cool that we thought about way back when, maybe they can become some kind of character in GTA 6, or elements of their characteristics could be transplanted into this other idea we've got over here. So there's that one. And then there's protagonist 3, the right-hand man of the Colombian drug lord. There's some hints of Brian Hedder in here, I think. Yeah. Brian's a classic drug runner from the golden age of smuggling in the Keys, still moving product through his boatyard, etc., etc. That is the protagonist 3 was managing the importation of narcotics into the United States via Vice City. That is basically what Brian is doing here.
I can definitely see that through line with protagonist 3, the Brian Hedder link. I think that makes sense. Brian Hedder's clearly a significant character in GTA 6. He wouldn't be such a kill part of the material. We talked about this on a previous show. Is he the person? Does he shop you in? Does he betray you? We don't really know, but they said this explicitly on the GTA 6 website. There's a moment that changes everything for Jason and Lucia, where they clearly get in too deep and are dealing with the dark side of what the drug smuggling world is. So that feels like that could have a link to Brian Hedder. The Booby Ike thing is interesting. The only thing that would throw me off that scent is in the original description of protagonist 2. It says the police officer's son, a very religious Cuban-American junkie who tries to escape his addiction. So, could Booby Ike be a recovered junkie? Maybe, but he doesn't. This is, again, there's a lot of stereotypes in my mind here right now. He doesn't look like an active junkie. I read that protagonist 2 description as almost like not someone who's a power player, but someone who's caught up and sort of a victim of this world and maybe lower level, but didn't seem to be like. Booby Ike's got more of he's made it. he's a big figure on the scene.
Yeah.
That's the bit that doesn't tie up for me. But this is so difficult to judge, isn't it? Because it's a hypothetical versus our knowledge of a character we barely understand. So it's really hard to align.
Well, let's have a look at version 2 then. So that was the original version, allegedly, that was developed in 2016. Version 2 offered a less dark scenario, this time featuring 2 protagonists. Protagonist 1, a policewoman, daughter of a Vice City cop who was murdered while on duty, on a quest for personal revenge with the goal of infiltrating the local underworld in order to dismantle it, completely illegally, alongside her service as a police officer. And protagonist 2, a drug smuggler's underling, quite crazy like Trevor from GTA 5, rising in ranks as the story progresses. This new version was in development for approximately 18 months before being cancelled in mid-2018. The only thing that stands out to me here, well, apart from the going back and forth on like someone else who was working in the police force and daughter of a Vice City cop, there's some hints there towards maybe Lucia's ultimate character, but obviously we don't know any of that background from her right now. But the drug smuggler's underling has some hints of Cal Hampton to me, who's, Jason's friend, fellow associate of Brian's, Brian being the drug runner. Now, I don't see him being like crazy like Trevor from GTA 5, but he's definitely the conspiracy nut who might come across as what some people would describe as a crazy person with all his like theories and stuff about what's going on in the world. So I could see a little hint to him there. I don't know if you feel the same.
I wondered with this one if there was any link to the leak we discussed last week. Well, I discussed it with myself, which is weird. The game role leak, which is a bigger thing about whether you believe it or not. One of the things within that, I didn't talk about the story at all. Either it felt a little bit like he was withholding because he knew that would be incendiary. But at the same time, there was nothing really major about story. But there was one entry about characters. And there's a character he referenced there, someone called Donnie, who says Jason's friend who works for Brian and is described as a, quote marks, freak. Now, there's a lot of things that are hard to put together here, but that sounds more like someone who's quite crazy, like Trevor from GTA. But we don't, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't know, if Donnie is real and who it would be in what we've seen, if that's the case, assuming we believe the game role leak.
Yeah, very much could be. I think as we go through this, it's going to be a lot of us going, oh, could it be this person? Could this be this person? It's like impossible to tell because, the game is over 6 months away and we're probably not going to get much more information than what we've already got. So it is all going to be us speculating and thinking about how things might connect. But I could see that happening. If we jump onto version 3, now this version allegedly only remained in development for a few months, and the storyline was similar to the first reboot, which is actually version 2, obviously.
Okay, yeah.
However, the grieving policewoman was replaced by an African-American man, a former soldier, released from prison and falling into the criminal world. This third version lasted up until about March 2019. And this is around the time that Dan Houser took some time away from Rockstar and then ultimately didn't come back.
Yeah, and there's a few things that do, from things we know to be true, that start to align around this rumour. One is quite recently, Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick said on the interview or the investor call, he said, development began in earnest on GTA 6 around about 2020, which at the time I felt was a little bit remarkable because it felt like the story of GTA actually went back considerably before the rumours did. So it did make you think, did something change? And that also aligned with, I think we talked about this on a previous show, also aligned with that's around about the time or shortly after Dan Houser had definitely left.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to now in my mind get clear, when did Dan took a year's sabbatical and basically came back to leave. So all of those dates align.
Yeah, so according to the reports, Dan's extended break happened in the spring of 2019, which, March is pretty much the spring, March, April, May, I guess.
Yeah.
Springtime. But then he officially left later on, right?
He left officially on March the 11th, 2020. So it sounds like he had a kind of year out sabbatical, whatever you would call it, depending on the nature of his departure in the spring of 2019. Now, if these rumours are true, and this third rewrite or reversion of GTA 6 was cancelled by Take-Two in March 2019, and then Dan left in the spring of 2019, which is probably, let's say, March to May, generously, there's a very clear line in that timing where you could imagine, this is all speculation, you could imagine a guy who's led the world's biggest entertainment franchise for 20 years being told, no, your third version isn't right, we're not going to make it, if that's even how this works, right? Saying to his bosses, well, how about funk you and funk you and funk you, and I'm leaving? Because you could see someone being enraged or annoyed that being told that thing wouldn't get made.
Yeah, it's like someone else write it then.
Yeah, I'm done. And because he doesn't need any of this anymore. He's already independently rich from the previous games. He doesn't need it. You've got the all you're losing, I suppose, is the thing you control that you love and your legacy. But there's a point where you go,
only that.
Yeah, but there's a point where you go, I've still got that. Those games were made. They'll always be mine forever. What we built is always mine forever. But I can't tolerate where this has got to. And for me, right now, I don't need it, and I definitely don't need the money.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a lot of extrapolation and speculation on my part. But that is in reality how human beings react to these sort of things, right? I think there's another overlay here that we're not seeing. And there's also a side of this that assumes that Take-Two even have sign-off on the treatments. Publicly, Strauss-Zelnick talks almost like Rockstar are their own thing. That's not for me to decide. They're the creatives. They're the geniuses. We let them get on with it. You do think, though, there must be some veto because they're still the ones ultimately who are putting the money up, and it's reported on their accounts, and it would be their reputational damage if something went wrong. You'd think they'd have some kind of top-level veto or line in. To say literally, we've got a company under our books we have literally no control over, that's kind of insane to me.
Yeah. But, I mean, that kind of stuff is so difficult to do. Like, what are they vetoing at this stage? Like, the script? And even that, you could just say, like, the core of this is good, but actually it's a bit dark, so can we just change this and this rather than going, no, go away, rewrite it. We don't want 3 people, we want 2. Like those are core gameplay decisions that are being made.
It feels quite semantic as well, that. Like, unless there was something not revealed here in terms of the way the story went that was way darker. Like, it's not, the description of the setup, I don't think for any of them is that offensive.
No.
But like, let's say it led to, it touched on a really serious adult theme or went to a really dark, nihilistic place. That's where someone might go, wow, man, that story sounds like kind of a bummer. Or aren't we going to get a load of blowback for when that thing happens to character X? They might be legitimate pushbacks. Without knowing how that relationship works, we don't know. Maybe that could cause a problem. Like, and I don't want to sort of say out loud the sort of things it could do, but there's dark things that could happen where you go, wow, maybe they shouldn't have been allowed to do that.
Yeah, but you would imagine that would just come with like, okay, write that bit out. Don't do that.
Yeah, but don't tear it all up. Just change that character decision. Now, whether it was at the point where Dan Houser, who's operated almost like an auteur, in terms of the script, went, I'm not effing changing it, and funk you again. Like, who knows? Who knows really what the truth of the process is? And even the most auteuristic leader, creator, whoever, you've still got people you answer to. You ultimately answer to the audience.
Yeah.
So there's always a degree of culpability for what you create. Oh, it's so hard to say. Like, I think maybe we can finish talking this through. I think there's another overlay again about, and that's to assume this has got anything to do with why Dan Hoser left, because I'd heard other stories about why he left, which maybe we can talk about a wee bit later as an alternative, or maybe an additional reason for why all this came to pass.
Yeah, well then the final version as we understand it is the fourth storyline was presented and approved at the end of 2019. So they've had almost a year of making this version from the previous thing that they were left with. The storyline will focus on two protagonists, a couple whose plot is inspired by the story of gangsters Bonnie and Clyde. The man, Jason, is a former military man who falls into the criminal underworld, taking up the idea of the third version, except that he's not African American but Caucasian, and that he does not leave prison. The woman, Lucia, is a Latina from Liberty City, and she is the one who is getting out of prison. Development began in earnest at the beginning of 2020. As you said, this does match up with Strauss Zelnick's statement in the most recent investor call, where he said that GTA 6 development began in earnest in 2020 following the success of Red Dead Redemption 2.
Is that the words that's used in this leak?
Yes.
Development began in earnest. Yeah, I mean, that's literally the wording that Zelnick used.
Which is, I think, is the point, that it is easier to write this last bit of the timeline retrospectively because we know that thing has been said, and you can put that in as a statement to go, yes, and you can go and find the source on this, and it's actually coming from, the boss of Take-Two. So that kind of stuff does match up, and it is easier to write the descriptions of Jason and Lucia because now we know, what their official descriptions are. You could write that into a thing that sounds, a bit more wordy and not from an official source. But that is basically the storyline that we're getting now, and there are some things I think throughout this that is seeding through everything. There's drug smuggling, of course. There's some sort of police connection, it seems to be, between all versions of this story. And as we've talked about many a time, one of the protagonists, Jason and or Lucia, could have some kind of connection to the police in some way. Of course, there's organized crime, ambition, revenge. And I think the interesting thing is like Cuba and the Caribbean connection, which we've seen a lot of in Trailer 2. But does that extend to additional islands and that kind of thing? It feels like if you take the original concept of Americas and it being, a much bigger expanded world, has one of those islands or some of those islands survived into the world of GTA 6? I'd like to think so, but we got to wait and see. We don't know. And this is, again, joining up the stitches of all the different rumours. It does seem that at one stage this was a much bigger project. It was GTA Americas. It wasn't just Vice City or Leonida. It was like different areas of Central or Southern America. Super ambitious. That lends itself very much to what's the purported like story one, the more Narcos style story that explores, I guess, where the drugs are consumed and dealt, where they're created. It's a much, much bigger, more ambitious, multi-layered story. That's probably logistically the difficult bit, where someone went, not only is this a difficult story, building 3 interconnected worlds and geographies is too much. Yeah. It's crazy. And you can see that being why development started in earnest at the beginning of 2020, when it could have been that before that, obviously the area, Vice City and the surrounding area, was locked. The gameplay mechanics and things are all in there. But what could be changing is like number of protagonists and how the switching is going to work if that is happening. How many do we have to switch between 1 and 2 people, or 1, 2, and 3 people? And all of that stuff could have been changing throughout the development. And it's hard to develop certain things to do with gameplay if you don't know how many core characters you're trying to put that or implement all of those things onto. So if all of this is correct, the beginning of 2020 could be when you go, okay, team, everything we've got so far is fine, but now we're locking it down. This is the areas we're focusing on. This is the map as it stands. We're going with 2 protagonists. Please go away and continue with your work. Like, I could see that happening. And a lot of the background stuff is obviously already in place. The world building, the cities, all of that stuff can carry on regardless of if there are 2 or 3 protagonists. But to do all of the then gameplay mechanics and, you know, even to the point of entering a vehicle, and if you've got some people with you, whether that is 1 person or 2 people on certain missions, probably changes quite a lot of that structure and animation of like, okay, we have to get 2 people and they just get in the front of the car. But now if we have 3 people, we have to animate, work out a way to get 3 people from A to B. And the car that they were going to go in is a sports car. So now that car has to be a different car.
Yeah.
And like, there's a lot of knock-on effects that might happen depending on how many people you've got with you.
So to join up with some of the other rumours, or not rumours, leaks we've had, one of the more reputed journalists talking about GTA has been Jason Schreier, who in, I think, middle 2022 was the first to come out and say it's a Bonnie and Clyde story.
Mm-hmm.
And then it talked in more depth about cultural issues at Rockstar, which we should talk about as well. One of the other things he talked about is almost like an aside at the end was the plan is to release the game and add missions and maps after release. So I wonder if that was, okay, we were halfway through building, you say it, Cuba, whatever, but it comes into play later on. Is it Liberty City comes into play later on? We don't know. That's massive speculation. But like Schreier felt sufficiently emboldened to mention the fact that additional maps might come into play. And this is what he wrote in the middle of June 2022 when he was clearly latched onto the version of GTA 6 we see today. So I think that's significant. There was nothing really I was looking again at the game roll leaks, whether you believe them or not. There's nothing there explicitly about that. I think that what that talks about is there being like a 5-part story, but that's a different thing to this. I think that's it. I think that brings us kind of up to date.
I think just before we move on to the next thing, you want to briefly touch on the Dan Houser departure and the Jason Schreier rumours of why that may or may not have happened.
Yeah, well, I think this has been quite well reported, is that Rockstar had a terrible time on Red Dead Redemption 2. It was at the point of like company revolt. They were working crazy long hours. A lot of things on that project weren't going well. Morale was super low at the company. And they had a kind of come to Jesus moment where they had to basically convince the staff things were going to change. And after the back of that, a lot of key personnel left. Like, Leslie Benzies had left before. Mm-hmm. Maybe I don't want to say anything that's going to get me in legal trouble, so I won't. So, but Leslie Benzies left before. We had some of the other designers on GTA and Liza, Imran Sarwar left. Whether that's unrelated or not, I don't know. But the biggest of all was Dan Houser's departure. And I think it's probably easier to draw a line between this big internal cultural revolution around the crunch leading up to Red Dead Redemption 2 release, which is 2018, or like the year leading up to that. So the tensions in the company would have been rife 2017, 2018. And then Dan's leaving like within a sort of year later. I think it's definitely part of that. And like the reasons he might have left are, well, like we said, it could be a really strong creative difference, as in they've rejected my rewrites. It could be, it's often happens, something to do with money or bonuses or what I'm owed. Or like something like this, like a huge cultural change in the way we as a studio operate, where, and I know this to be true, like it was always led in a, Dan he's got such a power to influence what thousands of people in the company do to an almost unhealthy degree that you could see why some people in the company might want that to change. Mm. So this is a lot of speculation there, but that might be the reason for his departure. Might be more to do with cultural reset that's been reported by Schreier and seems to be pretty much openly accepted, versus creative frustration, or maybe a bundle of all of those things.
Yeah.
That's what we don't know.
All right. Well, let me leave you, as we know that, has been reported that the story is some kind of Bonnie and Clyde based story. I will leave you with the synopsis of Bonnie and Clyde, which is: during the Great Depression, Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker of Texas meet when Clyde tries to steal Bonnie's mother's car. Bonnie, who is bored by her job as a waitress, is intrigued by Clyde and decides to take up with him and become his partner in crime. They pull off some hold-ups, but their amateur efforts, while exciting, are not very lucrative. Bonnie and Clyde turn from small-time heists to bank robbing, which you can see quite a lot of similarities in the GTA trailers 1 and 2, and some of the descriptions of what Jason and Lucia are going to get up to. So if you haven't seen that film or read about the real-life Bonnie and Clyde, go and do it, and it might give you some hints towards where we're going with GTA 6. Right then, a quick little music update for you now then, Dan. And Grammy award-winning producer Jermaine Dupri has said during a recent episode of the new Rory and Mal podcast that he was approached about Grand Theft Auto, saying, they asked me to do Grand Theft Auto, and they were saying, like, Drake got his own radio station on Grand Theft Auto. The way that they are getting ready to do that is Drake can actually upload music that we probably ain't never heard online or wherever else on that video game. Now, he never mentioned GTA 6, but Drake, as far as I know, doesn't have a radio station in GTA yet. So you want to join the dots and go, okay, well, maybe they are talking about GTA 6. Could it be GTA 5? 10% likely. Could it be GTA Online related? Slightly more possible. Could it be GTA 6 Online or whatever that ends up being? Yes. But I think, this is a good indication that maybe Drake is going to feature in GTA, the future of GTA in some way. And the interesting bit here, I guess, is the way that they're getting ready to do it. Like, being able to give artists the ability to upload music, like new music or unreleased music, into the game and promote it that way is something that we haven't seen happen very often. Although it has happened with GTA 5, of course, but this could be like a new way for the music industry to get involved in video games in a way that they haven't really connected before.
Yeah, a lot of it from like a plausibility and business model point of view makes a lot of sense. Like we've talked on the show about how Fortnite had entered and captured that space, and having like big, Travis Scott live concerts, and like my kids know about Eminem through playing Fortnite, who they otherwise would have been generationally apart from them. They know Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg, he's quite an old man now. Like he wouldn't be someone who my kids know about, but they do through Fortnite. I think Rockstar would clearly have looked at that. They'd have looked at Fortnite as a success story and a model, and said, they're eating our lunch. GTA Online has to compete or beat what they do. And I think one element of that would be the cultural element.
Yeah.
And I don't believe if there is a custom Drake radio station, and he's as an artist makes perfect sense. Of course, he's really super popular. He's got a massive audience, feels really contemporary. That makes all total sense. But to have his own channel that he can launch music in feels like more of a cultural moment, and would actually, to take this to a crazy ramp up level, all the stuff we've talked about and you've talked about, James, about could GTA feature a chronological element? Could it be that the Drake album reveal gets talked about in GTA as a virtual thing that actually becomes a real thing, so people tune in on a certain day to listen to, and then he does the concert in GTA Online or whatever. Right? We don't know how any of that stuff works.
Yeah, I mean that feels like the Drake concert in GTA 6 coming, August 16th. Load up the game just like you would in Fortnite. That feels like a thing.
it just feels like if they don't do it, it's surprising because Fortnite has.
Yes, you can
And
have
it's-
this one for free, Rockstar.
Yeah,
Do it.
and it's worked for Fortnite, right?
Yeah.
Well, I say it's worked. I don't know the finances of it, but in terms of raising the profile of Fortnite, it's tremendously worked. And like in terms of like for the stars involved, like I've just said, they've reached an audience like my kids, teenagers, would never have known about those people were it not for this. So for the artist, it's a brilliant way of reaching new audiences. All of it makes sense. And I also believe, even in the way is it Jermaine Dupri talks about it, the way Rockstar pitched it to him as almost like, well, Drake's got his own channel, like trying to create FOMO, which is a very classic thing of when you're trying to court someone. You go, oh, well, it's, it might not be for you, but Drake's got a channel. And you'd be like, oh, Drake's got a channel. Let's see, well, I'm going to do 2 channels. Something in that approach makes sense.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something in this. And there's been a few other big names. DJ Khaled's been linked, and T-Pain. There's other people who've been linked to GTA 6. It all sort of makes sense. Like, how do you think this is going to manifest itself?
I think exactly like that. Like, I can see some of these people having their own radio stations, not necessarily playing their own stuff, but being able to curate a radio station that they host. I think, like DJ Khaled could easily do that, and Kendrick Lamar has been reported to having his own radio station if Drake gets one. These are all like
Drake and Kendrick in the same game.
These are big name artists, right? That are gonna obviously want to promote some of their own stuff, but could also be a platform so they can help other artists that they're into, and just be like, I'm making this radio station in this new video game. Do you want to put your music on it? I'm hosting the radio station. And they could just go to people that they like and go, hey, do you want to be in this? And they'll probably get some good deals out of it. But, if you have Drake coming to you going, do you want to be in this thing? And you're like, yeah, okay, I'll just be in it. That sounds good. It's a good way of doing it. You've also got, I think, Megan Thee Stallion, and as you mentioned, T-Pain are all rumored to have some connection to GTA 6 in some way. Not necessarily all of them getting their own dedicated radio station.
That feels a bit...
That's a lot.
Yeah, it feels like it becomes confused then.
Yeah, but I think 1 or 2 of them probably will either have their own dedicated thing, or, like a featured 20 minutes or something where they're like, here's a guest host for a while, and while you're listening to whichever station it is, they just appear for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then, the extension of that is you see some things in the game world, although then these people would have to exist within the lore of GTA 6 as well. But then other celebrities have done that in the past. And then you just have a concert venue where people just appear every month or every few weeks. So you can just in-game go there at a certain time and it's on and you can enjoy it. Finally, you may have seen some reports this week that the map outline was actually present way back in the 2022 leaks. And I'm aware some of you may be all over this already and have talked about it before, but let's point it out now. As with all of these things, you have to do a few things. First of all, we have to check if the image is actually real, that someone's going, look, here it is.
Yeah.
And our sources confirm that the image that is in this Twitter post from this account, which is like a known account for posting just a load of rubbish.
Yeah.
So it doesn't help their cause.
Yes.
But I think the image is legitimate. It is from those files. It only appears once within those files, within a world editor window. But there's nothing to say that this is the map. But of course, now knowing what we know about the map, you can say it could be, right? It's a tiny symbol inside of a bigger window that is surrounded by what you'd assume to be blue ocean and a little green splodge. And if you zoom into it enough, you could conceivably say, look, it's the outline of the GTA 6 map. I think what you could also say is, look, it's the outline of the GTA 5 map, or just any kind of indication that it is the world map button. So I think, even given the date 2022, that this very much could be a GTA 5 logo in the development system that just hasn't been updated, or maybe it never gets updated. Maybe it is just that symbol and everybody knows that that's the symbol for the world map. If you make the leap and you say that it is the GTA 6 map, what it does show, and things can change, of course, is that the map once again is surrounded by water, and it's an island like all of the previous GTAs, not like we have maybe speculated that one side of it might be mountainous and it might be blocked that way.
Yes.
Like a la Red Dead,
Yes.
I guess.
Yes.
But if you take this as it looks like, it's an entire island. It also doesn't show that there's a panhandle, like the in real life Florida panhandle of the state is not attached to it. Is that impossible to show in an image like this? Does it break the little square box that it's meant to be in? Probably. So there's a load of caveats going on here. My thoughts are that it's probably just an image of what everybody in the development team knows of as the world map image, and not an indication of the actual map. But go for it, Dan. What do you think?
There's a few different things you can tie together. One is, I guess, to address the fact that, say we take this image at face value and say we think this image is telling us that it's, like you say, an island surrounded by water. That is consistent with the game role leak, where it says explicitly under map, it says the map is once again an island, no panhandle. So that side of it aligns with, but you've also got to be, I'm a little bit worried about which came first, chicken and the egg.
Yes.
Is one rumor feeding the other?
Yeah.
Is someone taking the last leak and leaking something because it sounds more true because the last thing sounded true? There's that side of all of this. Now, the GTA mapping project, who are the most evidential, I guess, of all of the map projections, because they use real life telemetry data and photographs. Now, I think they're really accurate around the south side of Leonida, but where they themselves don't seem to know. Like the latest version of the GTA mapping project has a northern perimeter that's currently surrounded by sea, but it says, Gloriana State, which I guess is like real life, because real life Florida is connected to Georgia. Mm-hmm. If you were actually copying real life, there'd be a landmass connected. But like we talked about and you said up top, but then the problem becomes you have to build a mountain range that basically circumnavigates like 100 virtual miles or something. Yeah. It's like the Great Wall in Game of Thrones we keep referring to. That you'd have to do so many tricks to keep people from crossing that maybe it's simpler to just say it's an island for reasons.
Yeah, it stops here.
Yeah, it's from map design point of view the simplest thing to do.
And it doesn't hurt it at all, I don't think. Like, GTA 5 was an island, but still felt like, there was lots of interconnected places within that island, as it were, but it wouldn't matter if there was a massive mountain at one end of it or not.
Yeah, and that betrays real world geography, right? Because obviously Los Angeles links up to, you got the Coast Road, you're going to San Francisco, Seattle. Yeah. It's different in there. So I think it's just a workaround for the fact that it's a nightmare to build ginormous mountain ranges and to stop someone, what point do you have to make the plane go down? Does it hit the mountain?
Yeah.
It's easier to do the infinite ocean as the ultimate workaround.
Fine. Well, let us know what you think about that and all of the things that we've talked about in the comments below. You can also get in touch with us on Twitter at GTAVOclock and via email GTAVIOclock@gmail.com. There will, of course, following this episode on Thursday, be a newsletter.
Oh, yes, there will, because that's most of my Thursday, writing the newsletter. So what we often do is condense a lot of what we talked about in the show, put explicit links to things we talk about in the show, also report any news that breaks between the recording of this episode and the show, which is a couple of days, so sometimes there is. If you would like to read that newsletter for free every Thursday at 6 p.m. BST, please head to gamesradar.com/newsletter. And I implore you to do so because it makes the efforts worthwhile.
And just before you do that, don't forget to hit the like button if you're listening on YouTube, and of course, the subscribe button. And once you've done all that, you can then come back next week for another episode of GTA 6 o'clock.